Okay, so thank you for having me. I'm just going to kind of walk around, but first I'd just like to tell you a little bit about why I got interested in this. I've always kind of been interested in history in general, but when I was little, my grandfather was actually in World War II. I didn't get to ask him a whole lot because when you're young, you don't really pay attention to those things in most cases. You know, I had things to do, places to go play. But he always had this box of things, and it was kind of like a treasure trove to me. And I would always go in there, and he had, you know, money from places throughout Europe, and I always thought it was very cool. He had patches from uniforms, and that kind of got me very interested early on. Then as I kind of got older and I went to college and I started studying, I became very interested in the woman's side of things. I watched things like A League of Their Own, and I got really inspired, and I just wanted to find out more and more about this. So as I was studying and trying to figure out, you know, what could I do for my master's thesis at Drew, because I needed to figure out something that I could live with and be excited about, because if it's a boring topic, as you probably know, it's not going to go too well with the whole process. So I started looking around. I was always interested in, you know, the Rosie the Riveter type thing. And I noticed that there was a lot of information not collected about New Jersey's story. And I figured, you know what, that would be a really interesting thing. I should try to look and see what was going on. And I ended up finding far, far more than I actually needed for the book. There was just so many different things going on in the state. And it was really amazing to see what these women did and the different things that people on the home front actually had to go through, the things they had to put up with even, and sacrifice. So what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of a couple different topics I have going on in the book. So the book covers a lot of different things. So from the military aspects, the Women's Army Corps, the Navy waves, all these different areas where women kind of jumped in and they had never been allowed before. Rosie the Riveters, so the civil defense workers. We've got Army and Navy nurses who, I mean, their story is truly, truly amazing what they did. The Red Cross volunteers and the USO. So I'm going to try to talk about a little bit of each thing for you. And please, if you think of questions, then I'd love them. So this really quick is an interesting photo because the women originally, when the Army decided, you know, we're going to have the Women's Army Corps, and it's just going to be auxiliary at first, and then it ended up, you know, the following year, they dropped the auxiliary part. But originally, these women were only supposed to do clerical things, and they were supposed to do administrative work, and as you could see, this didn't necessarily happen. So they ended up being far, far more mechanics and, you know, just anything, parachute riggers, which I have a really great photo of. But so we're just going to talk about specifically what did they do in New Jersey? Why is New Jersey so unique? The really great thing that I found when I was doing this research was that these women had so much to say about what it was like in wartime New Jersey, what it was like for their own experiences. So whenever I could, I try to include these quotes from archives and things like that. But on the home front, it was actually very ominous, according to these women, and especially with about 130 miles of shoreline, it was a unique experience at the Jersey Shore because, first of all, there was this fear that we could be targeted by the German U-boats. So there were sightings off the coast. So in the Atlantic, we had to do something. So the Office of Civil Defense said, you know, what could we do to make the targets at least minimal? So their answer was, we were going to have dim-out restrictions. So the people along the shorelines had several restrictions. They had to have blackout curtains, so no light shown. Especially in areas like Atlantic City with the casinos, they were very strict because the idea was, you know, you could see them, they were very visible. So they would paint the caps on the headlights and things like that. And during a drill, they would actually have to extinguish all the lights. So nothing was supposed to be showing. And they would actually have women volunteers walk around and cite people for violations. Or they would knock on their door and give them a verbal warning and say, you know what, you're supposed to have the lights out. We could fine you, you know? So women volunteered for that as well. But a couple of quotes that really stood out about wartime New Jersey. The first one is that they knew it was coming, and they said that the tension was just really, really strong. and that the guys were getting their draft numbers, and a lot of people, especially at Rutgers University, they have a great archive. I got a lot of information from their oral history, and you don't even have to go there, which is great because you could actually look at the transcripts online, which is what I did. So the women at Rutgers, a lot of them said, you know what, we had absolutely no social life once the war was on. All the guys got either drafted or they left, they volunteered, and it was like a ghost town. So they had no dances anymore. So what the women ended up doing was they joined the Red Cross and they joined the USO, and that's how they socialized. And then they also boosted the morale of the troops, so it was great in that respect. So then another woman talks about how everything was very oversaturated. They listened to the radio a lot, and it was war themes, and when you went to the movies and you got the war bulletins at the end. And it's very interesting to see that even the children with the comic books, it was kind of saturated. So, you know, it's very popular now, right, because the big screen, we got the Avengers and Captain America, but the first time you see Captain America in the 40s, he's actually punching Hitler in the face on the cover. So it's very, very political, it's very interesting. So that was even war propaganda. So, and then Pat Witt, she runs the Barnes Studio of Art. She's very active in Millville. She is such a wonderful lady to talk to. But she talks about the shore being very frightening and ominous because of the blackout. So she said that it was frightening during World War II. People don't realize it because we're so near the coast. So they were in blackout time, and all the headlights were painted black halfway down, and the street lights were capped, and then you had blackout curtains. And she actually kept her blackout curtains. She just recently donated them to the Millville Air Museum within the past couple years. So it was an ominous time. Plus, you know, you had rationing that was affecting people, and the women were the ones that were going to fix things so that the family could still run, even with all these restrictions. So they were encouraged to can goods. They were encouraged to grow their own victory gardens. Okay, so they were in charge of, you know, making do, but not making it seem too much like they were doing without. And then, of course, you have the posters. And it, interesting to me was a lot of the women, when they were asked, you know, why did you decide to join these different organizations? Why did you go into the military? Some of them said, you know, the posters seemed like they were pointing at me and telling me this is what you need to do. And then, of course, others said the uniforms looked really nice. So that was also a draw. Some people actually picked different organizations, like the WWII over the Waves, because they liked the uniforms better. Apparently, at least that's what they said in their interviews. So this picture is from Fort Hancock, up in Sandy Hook, New Jersey. Originally, the WWII was just going to be an auxiliary branch. So they were very afraid when this was first proposed, the U.S. government that is, that people were going to be very much against women in the military, even though the stipulation was that they were definitely not going to learn how to use any kind of weapons. They were not going to be in direct combat. There was still this stigma of, you know, what's going to be next? If we let them do this, then what else is going to happen, right? So the idea was they were just going to be an auxiliary, and they were going to do clerical work. They were going to be administrators. Anything that the men in the military were kind of doing on the home front that they felt that the women could do, and then let more men go overseas and fight. So that was where that whole free a man for combat, free a man to fight slogan came from. But as you could tell, that also didn't stick. I love this picture. So this is again Fort Hancock, but in celebration, she's painting out the other A because they dropped the auxiliary part, and then they were recognized as officially part of the armed forces, which meant afterwards they could actually use the GI Bill and go to school. Okay, so all the other branches I'm going to talk about, that applies to, except for the WASPs. The WASPs were the Women Air Force Service Pilots. They actually weren't considered part of the armed forces until the 70s. So they were considered civilians working with the armed forces, which kind of, you know, gets into a situation with veteran status and benefits afterwards. So they had to wait a couple of decades to actually get recognized. So this local woman from Summers Point, she talks about the effect that it had on her, which I think is great because this was echoed throughout the different things that I read. So she said, you know, she was really shy and bashful, but then once she got done basic training and once she actually worked independently, it really helped her and it kind of changed her. And a lot of these women say the same thing, which I think is really amazing. So, historians always have this question, well, how much did it impact things? Because what if most people went back to the home and they wanted that return to normalcy and they want to have families? Well, it did affect them in their lives, even if they didn't continue in a military career, even if they didn't continue, in a civil defense type position at that factory after it was over. It still really affected them. And these are more New Jersey WWIIs. So, again, at Fort Hancock and at Fort Monmouth, the other one. So they trained and they ate at the mess hall and things like that. So their basic training was very similar to what the men did, except they weren't trained in weapons and things like that. Okay. I love this picture because, again, they were supposed to only be doing the clerical work. And what this woman's actually doing is a very complicated job of rigging the parachutes. So, which is a very important job as well, because you can guess what happens if you don't do that right. But they did so many more things. So mechanic, they learned how to drive large trucks. They learned how to fix those large trucks. So they pretty much did everything. Medical too. And anything that wasn't filled by the other forces, like the nurses and things like that. It's okay. So I put this quote in because Eisenhower was very against women joining the military. He was a very vocal opponent to this. So I think that it's really impressive that at the end, the women in the military actually swayed him. So he changed his mind, and he came out not only in support of these women, but he said that they shouldn't be on a reserve basis. He said they should be part of the regular army. Okay, and so he says he thinks it's a mistake to put them on a reserve basis rather than a regular. I think they should be an integrated regular part of the Army, and I think the Air Forces feel the same way. We need them. So I think that, the fact that they swayed him, and many others, MacArthur as well, so really a lot of higher ranking people, by their performance alone, and a lot of the women, like the directors of the different organizations said, we could tell that we needed to be better than the average person, or even better than the men, because people were looking at us and kind of waiting for us to fail, and we couldn't allow that to happen. So I think that was interesting, like how much pressure they actually had on them.
Is this a quote from Eisenhower, president, or a quote from Eisenhower?
The general. Yes. So right after the war, actually, yeah. So it was very interesting. I like to see that. In New Jersey, the Navy women were called the WWIIs. The government loves their acronyms, so they had to fit in these words, and they came up with the women accepted for volunteer emergency services, and they were the WWIIs, but they were the Navy women, okay? And they were all over New Jersey. So Wildwood, Lakehurst, which is the site of the Hindenburg crash, so they've got a really great museum if anyone's ever, it's about an hour away from here, but so this one woman talks about the fact that, she basically felt like everybody was doing something in society, and a lot of women had brothers and husbands that were actually volunteering or they were getting drafted, so they wanted to do something as well. They didn't just want to sit at home. So even if they didn't join the military, a lot of these women had jobs during the day, and then they would do something for the war effort at night. They would roll bandages for the Red Cross, let's say. They would collect scraps, tin and paper products. They would get blood pledges to send overseas, because that was really a pressing issue as well, or they'd volunteer for the USO. So, they were doing so many things. Actually, Pat Witt told me her mother was an airplane spotter, which before I started doing this research, I had no idea what that was. And apparently it was, just to make sure, to watch and see if there were any enemy planes coming near the coast. If for some reason they got close enough to do anything. So she said that her mother could actually tell what kind of plane, apparently, by the sound. It's pretty impressive. The Coast Guard also had their own organization. So it was a very, very small one, only about 10,000 people at the time of World War II. But a lot of the WWIIs actually crossed over into the Coast Guard because they thought maybe they'd have more opportunities because it was a smaller organization. But they did everything very similar to the Coast Guard men. Okay, and the director, again, so I just kind of love this this quote. She says, because we were untried, we knew that if one of us failed, we all failed, and that's why we tried so hard. So just the amount of pressure and the success that they had during this time is, to me, really impressive. Makes me wonder what I do during the day. And they had the Marines, and it's funny, General Holcomb, he was very against having an acronym, and this is his quote about giving the Marines an acronym. So he said, they're Marines, they don't have a nickname, and they don't need one. They get their basic training in a Marine atmosphere at a Marine post, and they inherit the traditions of the Marines. They're Marines. So that's the only one that you'll see didn't have an acronym because of that. So the first woman that was actually the director was from New Jersey. So that was interesting in itself. And a little side note that has nothing to do with New Jersey history, but pop culture. B. Arthur actually was a Marine. So Dorothy Spornak, if you watch the Golden Girls. Okay, the WASP. So these are the women Air Force service pilots. And like I said, they didn't actually have military status until the 70s. But that little gremlin over there was donated by Walt Disney for them to use during the duration of the war. So I don't know if you're familiar with the whole idea of the gremlins. Disney often had them wrecking planes because there's this myth that, that's what gremlins do. So if you're involved in planes, you definitely don't want to see gremlins because they just tear things up, right? If something goes wrong on an airplane, it's usually, well, the gremlin must have had something to do with it. So this is their female version of a gremlin that they allowed the WASPs to use for their mascot. Okay, so the WASPs were really impressive in that they weren't allowed to fly combat missions, but they were the ones that did training for the men. They ferried planes back and forth, like if they needed to be repaired and things like that. So they did a lot of flying, they weren't supposed to be in any combat situations. And what was most interesting about the New Jersey women that went to training was they trained at Avenger Field, which is in Texas. And if you could probably guess, when you're from New Jersey, the thing that stood out apparently for them was the Texas weather was a lot different than what they were used to. And that's what they complained about. It was the dust storms and the heat and the rattlesnakes in the barracks. And they were not happy with the atmosphere at all. But it was apparently a very strict process, and you could flunk out at any point for failing any part of the process. And a lot of them talk about it was very, very stressful because they didn't want to fail. Some of them talk about emergency landings in fields, and you obviously didn't have the navigation that you have today. So if the weather was bad, the visibility was low, and oftentimes they had to make emergency landings whenever and then try to find a farmer, let's say. One woman does describe she landed in a field and had to wait for a farmer to come and ask her why she was in his field and then tell her where she was and how to get back to the base. So they did a lot, and actually during training, over 30 of them actually died during this process. So, I mean, they really sacrificed a lot during this time. So African American women during the war, they faced segregation in every area except where there weren't enough to segregate. So the Women's Army Corps from the very beginning allowed them in, but they were separated in training and they were separated in duty location. Okay, the nurse and the cadet nurse corps, they started pretty much when the training really wasn't yielding too many people, then they accepted them into their ranks. So it was, fairly late in the conflict for many of these situations that they actually did accept them. The waves, the war was pretty much winding down when they finally accepted them into training and as officers. The Coast Guard finally in 45, but the WASP was the only organization that never accepted them. They wouldn't even, and I actually ran across a few rejection letters from New Jersey women that tried to apply, and they basically said, why don't you try the WAC, because they knew that they would, be accepted the WAC. So throughout the war, they didn't accept them into their ranks. This, I think, is interesting because we're, fairly close to Boardwalk, but during the war, Atlantic City got the nickname Camp Boardwalk because they moved the Army in. They were very afraid that they were not going to have the income to do anything because tourism was it was done during the war. Nobody was thinking about that. Most people weren't home. So what could they do? What could they do? The answer was, well, we'll allow the Army to come in and set up shop. So that's what they did. So not only did the Army come in, but they set up a huge hospital, which combined several buildings and ended up being the Thomas England General Hospital. So the men that got injured would come and kind of convalesce and recover in that facility. So the Red Cross would go there, the nurses and things like that, and it was this huge operation that not many people know about. So the American Women's Voluntary Services also, they kind of did a lot of things that the Red Cross did, but they were a separate organization, and they did other things that not many people knew about. Like, they were very in tune with disaster preparedness. So their idea was that, God forbid something happened on the home front, right? We actually did get attacked. They were trained in fire suppression techniques. They were trained to set up mobile kitchens to feed people. They were trained in various first aid. So they were always ready, and they actually held mock drills quite frequently to determine, how quickly can we respond if something gets bombed or if, there's some kind of attack on New Jersey soil. So they did a lot of things like the Red Cross as well, like set up blood banks and, salvage and things like that. But not many people know about them. There's a huge Atlantic County. Yeah.
I'm from Atlantic City.
Yeah.
Generation.
Oh, great. Yeah, there's a very vibrant community that, that's all they did was basically for the war effort. So. Okay, and they did other things, like they transported military people, they ran a motor pool, which the Red Cross also did, but these women would drive mail, they would drive people, so anything that needed to be done, there was a different organization set up to do this in the voluntary services. They also held fashion shows, what they called them. They were trying to tell people, listen, you can't buy new clothes because everything is now converted to the war effort, but this is what you can do. So they would have fashion shows telling you how to repurpose things. What different things could you do with this dress and how could you cut it and, make new clothes out of old ones. So, they were very involved in anything you could possibly imagine. Oh, I just love the smile, I had to include that. So again, driving for the motor pool. Okay, and they also volunteered at local hospitals. So again, that crisscrossed with a lot of the Red Cross stuff, but they were trying to keep the troops occupied. So if they were, in the hospital for a couple months and they were injured, a lot of these women would spend their time talking to them, giving them advice, bringing them magazines, playing games, anything you could think of, these women tried to do to kind of boost their morale. Especially for the young troops, a lot of the soldiers were, just out of high school, so a lot of them needed it in that situation. So now Pat Witt was a member of the USO, and her story was that you're supposed to be 18. She wasn't, so she was 17. But she said when she went to the local YMCA, she used to play basketball, and a lot of the troops would hang out at the YMCA, and they kept bothering the director and asking, why isn't she there, And finally the director said, well, I don't know, that's fine, I guess. And she talked about the fact that you weren't supposed to date. That was one of the provisions. If you were in the USO, you had a dress code, you had very strict rules, and you definitely were not supposed to date the troops. And she said that rarely happened, that they followed that rule, because actually most of them met their significant others at the USO functions. But these women, it was interesting that they had dances and they had snacks for these guys, and a lot of times they used their own ration cards in order to get this food. So another sacrifice that people maybe don't think of, that, in a time when things were very, very kind of strict, these women used their own ration cards for complete strangers just because that's what you do. They were just trying to do their bit, so. Slowly, there we go. Okay, Rosie the Riveters. I love this. So, this was the first image of Rosie the Riveter. This is by Norman Rockwell. This is not the one that the War Department chose to put on their posters. You might be able to guess why. This to, a society that was trying to say this was only for a short period. So, yes, women were going to take these roles on, but the idea was that don't worry about it, right? Because they're going to go right back when the war is done. No need to worry. So the fear was that women were going to become masculine, They were going to completely be different than they were before. So this was a very threatening image. So she's very muscular. She's kind of dirty because she's been working. Obviously it happens when you're riveting. She's actually stomping down on a copy of Hitler's Mein Kampf. So this is what they went with, right? You could see the difference. Because clearly that's what you would look like after you've been working in a factory all day, right? But, you know, less muscular, less threatening, makeup, eyebrows done, right? So this is the one that people are familiar with. So the Garden State Rosies, there were so many things going on in New Jersey. There was actually a huge war conversion. So, you know, Singer stopped making sewing machines. They made parts, you know, for machines and things like that for the war effort. You've got the Eastern Aircraft totally converted to making Wildcats and Avenger planes. So we've got these women actually working on the planes in the Trenton facility. So these women, for the most part, you know, were doing these very, very hard and labor-intensive jobs. Not all of them were riveters, right? But they're all under that blanket, Rosie the Riveter, because they all worked for the civil defense. And you really couldn't get new products at that point. Everything was converted for the war effort. So, you know, companies that were making clothing, let's say, they were converted to making things for the war effort, tents, and, you know, anything that the troops could use. And these are just some more examples. An interesting thing about New Jersey is that in some areas, which I mentioned in the book, they converted to ordnance, like the Picatinny Arsenal. They were actually working with explosives. But anytime there was a minor accident, if you look in the newspapers surrounding the incident, it was sabotage, and it was, you know, the FBI would come and investigate, and usually they would determine it was just something that happened during the course of work. But there was this general fear in society that, you know, there was, you know, people that were going to sabotage the factories and things like that. So it was definitely just a turnaround of, you know, what they had experienced. And then, of course, you know, Truman talks about the contribution and how the women, without them, they might not have been able to do what they did. So I just think it's great, the accolades they got after the fact. But I believe, all right, hope you have questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you haven't already,
Yes.
got something to eat?
Were these women organizations just a World War II construct, or do they also include World War I, Civil War, and other wars?
Yeah, actually the Red Cross was during World War I that it was really kind of mainstream here. So yeah, a lot of them were in existence. The American Voluntary Services was a World War II thing because they were copying off Britain because Britain already had it. And that's what they were doing because in London, what was happening was they were actually getting bombed and they were using these things. So they set it up here because, you know, they thought it might happen, but thankfully it never did. So, yeah.
Did your research bump into that tension of when the men came home, the women who now have a paycheck and are enjoying their newfound skills?
Yes, yeah.
Thoughts on that?
There was some of them describe a really rude awakening and some conflict. This one woman, and I forget her name, talks about the fact that she wrote her husband and she said, you know, I know you left me and you went over there and I'm kind of a changed woman now. I made my own money and I found out I like to work. And she said, you know what, I think some nights you're going to be off, you know, doing the laundry and stuff, and I'm going to be at a work meeting because that's just how it is now. I kept thinking this poor guy is like over fighting and getting this letter, probably thinking, what is going on? But yeah, there were a lot of things where women said, you know, it changed them. Even having a checkbook. I mean, for some of them, being able to write their own checks was a first. And to us, it's kind of amazing to think about. But it was really a step towards independence that they didn't have. Any other questions? Yes.
Could you describe the process of accessing the oral archives and records?
Yes, if you go on Rutgers, and I believe if you just type in the Veterans History Project, it will take you to the search where you can go. I think it's under special topics, and it says women in war or something like that. But yeah, Rutgers. Yeah, I can see if I can get it. That's a good idea. Any other questions in the meantime? Yeah.
With the women sectors being very agricultural, was there any special efforts? Because all the guys are out fighting the war, who's on the farm?
Yeah, actually there was an agricultural program where women would go, and in the same way as the civil defense, the women would go and work on the farms. A lot of times it was city women, which is interesting, because a lot of the people already in the rural areas were working on their own farms, right? So Pat Witt actually, she's from Millville, she had a farm, and she talks about the fact that they got extra gas rations because they had tractors and, you know, they had to run the farm. So she said whenever the guys that she knew would come back on leave, they would call her up and say, oh, you want to go to Ocean City? And she'd say, oh, yeah, sure. And then the next question would be, well, do you have gas? So she was really popular, she said, during that time.
What, what did you think of the fact that the women who were doing the flying had to wait until Obama finally gave them their credit?
Yes.
And it was a long
It
wait.
was a really long time. And actually one of the women that I interviewed, Bee Haydu, she was instrumental. And you could actually see her in pictures with Obama, trying to get this stuff going. So yeah, the fact that it took so long and
Very sad.
Why were
Yeah.
they treated differently than the other?
it was hard to surpass because early on they were considered civilians, and for some reason they would not acknowledge the fact that, you know, they needed to be a part of the Air Force. So there was resistance on the part of the Air Force for whatever reason, probably gender-based, that they didn't want them to have that status. So if you you just search Rutgers Oral History Archive on Google, and that's what brought that up. And then what I did is actually under special topics, if you click on that, then they've got a couple different things. So if you click on World War II home front, which is the first thing, then you could search, and then if you see a name that sounds like it's a lady, that's what I did.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yes.
Beyond the reference that you made to a league of their own, were there other sports teams that emerged because the women were similarly suited and together for a long time? Was there an athletic piece beyond the baseball team that we know?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know the only thing I encountered was that they actually played basketball when, like, on their training at the different camps, and they played baseball, but it was unofficial.
Okay.
So they had their own sports teams, like in the WAC barracks and, you know, at the Waves and things like that. So it depended, I guess, on who was interested. So a lot of times for recreation, I came across pictures of them playing, things like that. Anything else? Yes.
Where was the hospital in Atlantic City? Does the building still exist?
Yeah, I think it does still exist.
Resorts is part of it.
Resorts, yeah, that's what I thought,
I
yeah.
think the Clary's actually.
The Clary's was part of it
I think
as well,
that's where
yes.
Their prosthetic.
Yeah, actually, and there's actually, I found a picture of the men with prosthetics on the boardwalk,
Okay.
like exercising and trying to figure out how to use them. So it was just, you know, a couple rows of them with their prosthetic legs being taught how to, you know, move around with them in Atlantic City, so.
Atlantic County Library, Mays Landing Reference Department has a master's thesis from the California State University, I forget the fellow's name, on Camp Boardwalk.
Okay, yeah. And the Atlantic City Public Library had a lot of things, so if you want to research, that's really, you just have to call someone and get them ready for you. So everything's there because the boxes are all over, but there's really a lot of stuff there too.
So they bring them back on ships and then by train to Atlantic City?
They would come from ships usually, and then they would just kind of stay in the Atlantic City area until they got better. Sometimes they would go back, but it depended on the extent of the injury, really.
The ship would come into Atlantic City?
Well, I'm not sure where it would actually come into, but I know a lot of them describe like coming over on ships. I'm not really sure where that.
I don't think they feel like a harbor that would take. I mean,
I'll just give you a quick anecdote. The founders of the Noy Museum, Fred Noyes, was shot in the leg. And it was at the resorts. And Ethel Noyes volunteered, which was now Ethel Nickel back then, volunteered with the Red Cross and Civil Defense. And is responsible for saving Fred's legs from being cut off from surgery. And hence, they got married, and next thing you know, the rest is history.
This is the executive director of the Noise Museum.
It's really amazing the relationships that happen, during that time, and very long ones, that people stay together,
One little strange tidbit that's sort of related to this is that a violent woman was the first American woman captured since the War of 1812 in American territory taken to a Japanese prison camp.
Oh, wow.
Last letter's about to a book by Mary Brew, very interesting, just a story just in the
Okay.
last couple of years.
Great.
A woman from New Jersey who was the first prisoner of war since the War of 1812.
Right, yeah, it's interesting. And a lot of the nurses talk about that. They actually got pamphlets from the Army saying, this is what you do when you're captured. And the one woman said, well, I felt secure, but then I got that and I felt a little less secure. So, but yeah, a lot of our nurses from New Jersey actually went over and, ended up in England first. And they talk about the bombings and how traumatic it was to be in London at that point. She said it seemed like every hour a bomb was hitting and it sounded very close. So she said, I was happy to kind of get away from there and go into the, continental Europe. Any other questions or anything?
I just have a wonderful introduction to make. This is Jane Shop, who was indeed with the Waves.
Oh, wow.
And she will serve as one of our future lecturers, along with her son, Paul Shop. So I didn't know if you wanted to add anything, or we'll wait for your story, right? Okay. So Patricia, thank you again.
Thank you.
In the back of the room is a menu of the upcoming, Patricia served as our first inaugural lecturer for the Sesquicentennial's Women's March Towards Equity, and I'd just like to thank Gina Petrilla did a great job putting this together. We have Adam Jinter here as our videographer, and of course Christine and the rest of the team here, Paul as well. So we're really excited. You've done a beautiful job launching this missile of inquiry and a great story of women's history to be continued. So we have an opportunity. Patricia will gladly sign some books here and keep the conversation going. So don't be a stranger. How about a warm round of applause? So Gina just wanted to present you with
Letter from us.
Thank you.
Take care of it.
Thank you so much.
Start of spring coming up soon.
Yeah, I know. Keep it inside
I
for now.
know, I'm
but-
so bad at taking.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
That was wonderful.